So our speaker for today is Rukshan Uhak, and he's working in Bangalore, India. And the talk is on topological protection of quantum states for quantum computation.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Lo, for the introduction. So let me then get started. Yeah, first of all, I would like to thank organizers for this opportunity to present some of our work. And yeah, before I go ahead, I just want to clarify, because this is a mathematical audience, and I would like to clarify some of the terms from the physics side. So because topology has a specific meaning in mathematics. So what do I mean when I say topological protection here? So what it will mean for us is I will give more precise definition later on, but for as of now, it will mean that there are some global properties of the quantum systems which we are looking at, and they are we are not going to look at the local properties, or in other words, local properties are not which are more important for us rather than the global properties. So it is in that context the topological has been used here, but I will make it more precise as I go along. And similarly, quantum states, the mathematical definition will be, it will be a vector belonging in a Hilbert space, okay? With some interesting properties also, because it has to define a physical system. So it has to have some extra properties, but for us, it will mean a vector in a Hilbert space. And for our discussion, for the quantum computation, it basically means that you have we call it a qubit. A qubit basically means it has just the basis. There are just two-dimensional basis. It's a two-dimensional basis. Okay, we have just two states. So sometimes for our own visualization, we just call it up and down states. But mathematically, it's just a two-dimensional vector space that we are interested in quantum computing. I mean, at least the basic unit of the quantum state which we are interested in is a qubit, which is a two-dimensional Hilbert space for the quantum system. Okay, so with that, I would like to go ahead. And first of all, I want to mention that this work has, whatever I'm going to present, it has been done in collaboration with Professor Kaufman, and in fact, I have been doing many other works also, Professor Kaufman, but the work which we are going to present today is there are lots of discussions which have happened, and very enlightening discussions. So it's based on that collaboration. Okay, so here's a brief outline of what is going to come in today's talk. So we're going to talk about, first of all, I will give an introduction so that everybody follows, because this is from physics side. So I want to make it understandable for a wider audience. So I'll give some introduction, what we are in terms of the mathematical, the algebras and all that, which we are going to use. Then we will have a brief discussion about what is, we're going to talk about two models. One is something called a quantumizing model. And then we're also going to talk about it's a dual, which is called a Kitai chain. And we will talk about something called a Majorana edge modes. And then in context of the Majorana edge modes, we will see how the topological, the question of the topological protection comes in, and how Majorana edge modes are in fact give us way to attain the topological protection. Okay, so then we are going to go ahead, and later on in the later I would say second half of the talk, we are going to talk about Majorana fermions and the braiding. And that's where the connection, I think, to this the broader framework of this conference, which was about knots, surgery, and other things. So that's where the connection comes into the knots, and especially to the braids. Okay, and later on we will conclude this talk by talking slightly, also mentioning our the connection to the Yang-Baxter equation. Okay, so first of all, to introduce what we are going to do is, in physics we call it second quantization notation. Basically what it means is that we, rather than working with the quantum states themselves, we work with the operators. Okay, we work with the operator algebras. Okay, and here what do you see, these Ci, C sub I, and C sub I dagger, these are the two operators, and we are looking at their anti-commutator. Okay, so Ci is basically what we call as annihilation operator, and Ci dagger is basically what we call as creation operator. So assume a state which we call as a vacuum state where there are no particles, and these Ci and Ci, these are for a fermion, what we call as fermions. Fermion, the typical example of a fermion is an electron or even proton. So how do we understand them? How do we, the way we understand or represent these operators in physics is in terms of these creation and annihilation operators. Okay, we have, let's assume a state we have which is called the vacuum state, in which there are no operators. What we can do is that if we act like is what's happening here, we have this zero state, which is basically a state where there are no fermions, no particles present. We apply on that a creation operator, and it gives us a state where there is a single fermion. Okay, similarly, if we have a state where there's a single fermion present, what we can do is that we can apply a creation operator, and it is going to lead us to the zero state. Okay, so that's why we call it creation operator, and this is called annihilation operator. Okay, and this anti-commutator, if we basically open up, this is one of the properties of fermions. This is what in fact, we can take these equations as the definition of the fermions, and this basically says that fermions, they anti-commute among themselves. This is one of the interesting properties of fermions, as compared to the bosons. The bosons always they commute among themselves if we have a different bosons. Okay, or there's a commutator between two creation and annihilation operators for bosons. So there's a commutator, while as in case of fermions, there is an anti-commutator which we use. Okay, and that has consequences for the fermions. So one of the consequences is that we will come to that. That's called the Pauli exclusion principle. But I want to come to the second half of it. This is what we call in mathematics nilpotency. That if you scale your operator, both annihilation and the creation operator, it scales to basically to zero. Okay, and that nilpotency basically allows us to define another operator which is called the number operator. And these equations I have written basically here. We have this indices sub, so it can be for any fermion. But here this equation is for if we have just one single fermion. So the number operator for that single fermion can be used, can be written like this. You have a creation operator followed by an annihilation operator. And if you look at this number operator, so number operator is basically the operator which gives its eigenvalues, tell us how many electrons, how many fermions are present in a given state. So it actually is a number. So its eigenvalues are a number of the particles present in a given state. So that's why we call it number operator. And it's as I said here, this is nilpotency. The nilpotency of these creation and annihilation operators makes the number operator basically an idempotent. Okay, so these are very important, because now what does it tell us for a single, the idempotency of a number operator? What does it tell us for a given state? It basically tells us that the given state is going to have only two values available. Either it's going to be 0 or it's going to be 1. Those are the two eigenvalues which are for this number operator, and given the fact that it is idempotent. Okay, that's why you will see these states and are labeled as 1 and 0, because these are the only two states which are possible for a given single fermion. Okay, here I would also like to mention, because the notation which I'm using is in physics we call it bracket notation. This was introduced by Dirac. So this basically is just represents as something called a ket vector. It's a vector, the usual vector which we talk about as quantum state. And then we have, if we take an adjoint of it, that's called the Bra state. So we have this bracket notation by Dirac. Okay, so now something which we want to talk about, which we will later on highlight, is this one. This is a very interesting world of a single fermion. Okay, when we just talk about a single fermion, we talk about anti-commutation, we have a nilpotency, we have the idempotent operators, then we have this the world of just, we have two states only, but still it's very interesting. There is a lot which is over there. So I want to highlight one thing here, which is like U1 symmetry. Okay, if we look at this, if we now write down a simplest Hamiltonian, which I can tell you that Hamiltonian will have a form something like this. It will have this, because Hamiltonian for fermion basically commutes with the number operator, so it will have a form like this. Maybe some coefficients who are there of the energy, but it will have this operator form. And this operator form, as we can see, that it has a global U1 symmetry, which basically means if I multiply here the C operator by phase factor, e raised to iota theta, and we can also, that will become here e raised power minus iota theta. Those phases will cancel out, and we will be left out with the same number operator. So the fermions and their Hamiltonians have this interesting U1 symmetry. Okay, in fact, we say it other way around. We say that because there is U1 symmetry, that's why there's a conservation of the number operator, or there's a conservation of the number. That's why if you have some given number of the fermions in any system, you cannot just destroy them. Okay, so even if there is a creation and annihilation happening, but it happens in such a manner that the number of the total number of the fermions is conserved. So the consequence of this U1 symmetry over here is basically it leads us to the definition of the number operator. And now the question which will become important slightly later on, if we have situation, we will when we do not have U1 symmetry, in that case you will see we will not be able to define a number operator. The number conservation in some sense is breaks down over there. Okay, so one last thing which I want to say about the fermions is that about the fermions, it is known that they satisfy something called a Pauli exclusion principle, which basically means given a state, let's say we have a single fermion, only two things can happen: either there is no fermion or there is a fermion. Only we cannot have two fermions. Even if we want to have two fermions, we will have to introduce spin for them, and then we will have to make spin different, like one will have an up spin and another will have a down spin. So we cannot have fermions having the same quantum numbers in the same quantum state. So that's not possible. So that's one interesting property of fermions. Okay, this was to give you an introduction about the world of the fermions, because we are going to talk about them. Another interesting species of the fermions is going to come along the way. So that's why I just want to introduce this is what. So basically we have introduced an operator algebra through which we understand the various properties of the fermions. Okay, so going ahead, now what we want to do is that we want to say, let's say we want to introduce now different set of operators. As of now, we'll not talk about particles, but let's say we just introduce another set of operators. So where we have gamma 1 operator and gamma 2 operator. Okay, and we can verify it for ourselves that we can write C, the creation and annihilation operators, which we introduced in an earlier slide, that we can write them in this way, in this particular way, and the gamma operators themselves will satisfy this kind of an algebra. Okay, let me remind we can remind ourselves that this algebra is the Clifford algebra. Okay, so gamma operators are satisfying the Clifford algebra, while as C and C dagger operators are satisfy something called Grassmann algebra. Okay, so that they are nilpotent operators, they anticommute among themselves. Those are the defining properties of the Grassmann algebra. Okay, so what we see over here is that starting from the operators which satisfy Clifford algebra, we can arrive at operators which basically satisfy Clifford algebra. However, there is one interesting thing: these C and C, they correspond, these two operators correspond to a physical particle. Okay, for a physical particle we have these two operators. We may ask the question, what are these two operators, gamma 1 and gamma 2, corresponding to? So that will be one interesting question which we will kind of keep it open as of now, but we'll come back to it. Okay, so or we can inverse this transformation which we have defined here, and we can arrive at gamma 1 and gamma 2 can be written down at this particular way. Okay, but this particular representation is very insightful, because it tells us something about gamma 1 and gamma 2 operators. Okay, what it tells us that gamma 1 and gamma 2 operators are going to appear in situations, because formally, as we see here, they appear as some kind of a combination of creation and annihilation operators. Same over here. Okay, so this formal this representation over here tells us that gamma 1 and gamma 2 operators are going to appear in situations where we have annihilation and creation coming together. Okay, and let me answer this question now only. So what are the situations in nature where we have creation and annihilation operators coming, or annihilation creation process and annihilation process coming together? And let me give the answer to that question. So there's a physical system in the nature which is called a superconductor. Okay, in a superconductor, what happens, you have all the time, when you say in a superconductor, we have these something called Cooper pairs. Okay, we don't have electrons as such. There are no free electrons in a superconductor. The only thing which is available in a superconductor in superconducting phase are these Cooper pairs. But what is the Cooper pair made up of? It's made up of something called a particle and an antiparticle. It's made up of an electron and the antiparticle of the electron, which is called which is called a hole in a superconductor, though, but it's an antiparticle of the electron. So we have this electron and a hole particle, they're hole coming together, they make a Cooper pair. Okay, so we have the both creation. Particle creation means for a particle, and hole basically means we can understand the holes. What now, hole is not a particle, but if we want to understand whole itself as a particle, how do we say it? We say we reverse the process. We can say, because it's antiparticle, and as Richard Feynman has taught us, that you can think of antiparticles as particles but reversed in time. Okay, which basically means they are some sort of adjoints of the particles. Okay, that's what I'm saying. That's what we do. So if this creation represents the particle, creation of a particle, then this C, which for a particle represents annihilation, but for antiparticle it represents a creation, because it will act as an adjoint for the whole. So in a superconductor, superconductor is a place where we can have creation of a particle and basically creation of a whole happening together. That's what a Cooper pair is. You have both a particle and antiparticle. So you are creating a particle as well as you are creating an antiparticle together from the vacuum. Okay, so this particular guy is going to, this particular operator is going to do that job. It's going to create particle as well as antiparticle together. Okay, so therefore it suggests us that if we have to search for these particles, if we want to find what are these gamma 1 and gamma 2 physically corresponding to, we should look for superconductors. We may find some clues over there, and we will come to know that definitely that's the answer, that superconductors are very important in physically realizing gamma 1 and gamma 2. Okay, now let's give them a name also for a moment. So these gamma 1 and gamma 2, we call them Majorana fermions. Okay, and we will have a lot to talk about Majorana fermions. But one thing is to be noted is in a previous slide we saw that C and C dagger, they are two different operators. They are adjoint of each other, but they're different from each other. They do different things. One does creation and another does annihilation. But however, if we just take this gamma 1 and gamma 2, we can see for ourselves that if we just take an adjoint of, let's say if we take an adjoint of this one, so what will happen is that this will become C and this will become C dagger, it will remain the same. So similarly for this one, it will become C, this will become a C dagger, then we will also have a minus sign. If we take that out, we will ultimately get the same operator. So if we take adjoint of these operators, gamma 1 and Majorana operators, they basically remain same. What it means for us, so mathematically they are self-Hermitian. They are not different from each other. The adjoint and the operator itself, they are same. Physically, what it means? Physically, it means for Majorana fermions, creation and annihilation is same process, which basically means that for Majorana fermions, particle and antiparticle are not different. They are same particle. Or in other words, every particle is its own antiparticle. Okay, so that is one interesting property of these Majorana fermions. Okay, and now another property of these Majoranas is that they don't satisfy the Pauli exclusion principle. Because if we remember from previous slide that Pauli exclusion was coming from the fact that we were able to define a number operator, and that number operator was idempotent, which was telling us that there are two eigenvalues, 1 and 0. Okay, but however, these Majorana operators, they are self-Hermitian. We cannot define, they do not have so-called U1 symmetry. We cannot multiply them by a phase factor and get a U1 symmetry. Rather, the only best we can do is if we write down a Hamiltonian for Majoranas, which will be of the form of gamma 1 iota times iota gamma 1 gamma 2, the only thing we can do is we can multiply it by minus factor. So, or plus or minus, and even if you multiply it by minus, because these are real, so that minus sign is going to get cancelled. So we are going to get something called a Z2 symmetry. So when we go from, this is to be understood that when we go from these complex fermions, C and C dagger, when we go from complex fermions to the real fermions or these myronas, what is happening along the way is U1 symmetry breaks down to the Z2 symmetry. And along the way, we lose the Pauli exclusion principle. Okay. So that's what's happening. Someone may ask that, see, why are you calling them Majorana fermions? Because Pauli exclusion principle is an important property of the fermions. So then, to be honest, to be precise rather, so Majorana fermions, these guys are not actually fermions. They are the different species of the particles. We'll talk about them. So therefore, they are not actually, they are the different species, to be precise. That's why they do not satisfy Pauli exclusion. If they were fermions, they had to satisfy Pauli exclusion principle. Okay. So in these introductory slides, I just wanted to give you a brief kind of a background of what kind of, and we are going to talk about these myronas. So just wanted to give you a background of the algebraic background of what is it that we are going to talk about, and these myronas are going to give us the topological production, and these their algebraic properties are going to play an important role. Okay. Now what we do is that here what I have introduced here is a model, is basically a statistical or a quantum model here. So what we see here, this is minus G, which is called a coupling constant, and then these two guys who are here, they are once again two operators which represent the spin in quantum mechanics. Okay. So this is sigma I, this is the Pauli matrix, we call them Pauli matrices. This is a Pauli matrix. I over here means this is the site. This is a chain. We have written down this model for a chain, and this I is a particular site, and I plus 1 basically makes this sigma operator the neighbor of this sigma operator. So here we are saying that there are interactions, something called a nearest neighbor interactions between two spin operators, between two spin degrees of freedom, which are lying close to each other, which are basically neighbors, nearest neighbors of each other. And then, so that is the term, which is the coupling term between these spin. Then also we have applied another term over here. We have another term over here where Hz is basically is a magnetic field. It's a local magnetic field which is getting applied on a particular site, on a given site I. And what it does is that it basically tries to align a sigma operator in a particular direction. So sigma Z and Hz, they are going to be in the same direction. Here we have taken that direction to be the Z direction. Okay. So there you can see one thing in this quantum system. What we want to highlight is the sigma Z operator and sigma X operator, they do not commute with each other. The fact that they don't commute with each other gives rise to the quantum dynamics, because they don't have the same eigenstates, which basically means there's a competition between them. Sigma Z is trying to do one thing, is trying to align the system in one direction, but sigma X is trying to align a different direction. Okay. So that is their competition. Why this model is very interesting model. This was introduced for quantum systems with magnetic properties. So if we want to understand the magnetic properties in quantum systems, this is one of the model which was introduced. In fact, it is the quantum version of the Ising's famous Ising model, which was introduced by Ising for understanding the magnetic systems. Okay. So here, why I'm mentioning this model here is because it has a very interesting relationship with another model which interests us for today's talk. Okay. That model, let me name it, it's called Kitaev model. Okay. In literature, it was introduced by a Russian physicist, a mathematical physicist. So he's Alexei Kitaev. So he introduced this particular model. But I am trying to say, what we are trying to say over here is that this model which Kitaev introduced is not entirely a new model. Rather, it is related to the quantum Ising model by a transformation which is called a Jordan-Wigner transformation. Okay. What Jordan-Wigner transformation does for us, it basically gives you a mapping from spin operators. Okay. Spin operators, as we know, they satisfy SU2 Lie algebra, while as these C guys, which we have introduced earlier, they satisfy the Grassmann algebra. Okay. One would like to understand what is the relation between sigma operators. How do we go? Or in other words, is there a way We also sometimes call it fermionization, because it's easy for us to deal with the fermion operators, while as these sigma operators are slightly trickier to deal with because of their properties. They have some sort of fermionic nature, but simultaneously they also satisfy SU2 algebra. Sorry. So this transformation gives us a way to go from sigma operators to the fermionic operator. So Kitae introduced a fermionic model. So why did he introduce this model? He introduced this model because he was also looking for these particles which can give us topological protection, and he found that there is a model. If we follow that model, and in the ground state, when we get these quantum states, ground states and excited states, in the ground state of that Hamiltonian, there are special interesting particles, interesting modes, I may call them, which have these interesting topological protection properties. Okay, so that's why this model was introduced. Okay, I just wanted to show you that the Kitae model is also related to something called a quantumizing model, which has been studied extensively in physics literature. Okay, and here both these models have interesting symmetry, which is the Z2 symmetry, which is the same symmetry I told you is present for the, when we write down a Hamiltonian for Myron of fermions, they also have Z2 symmetry. Okay, so this Z2 symmetry is going to play an important role for us, so that's why I mentioned it here. Okay, now this is the model. I'm writing it down again. So it's called it was introduced by Kitae, as I said. So it's called a p-wave chain model because it is we are defining it for a one-dimensional system. We have a chain and we are defining this model for a one-dimensional system. Okay, p-wave is for a particular reason, because this particular parameter over here, it tells us that how much is the energy gap in a superconducting system, which basically means, let's say we have a superconductor which will have a ground state as superconducting, then there is a gap, then there is an excited state. That gap is called a superconducting gap. Okay, but this superconducting gap itself is a parameter. It can be a scalar, it can be a vector, or it can be even tensor. Okay, so it has a symmetry properties. Okay, so that's why this p wave is coming. The p basically means it has the symmetry properties of this superconducting parameter. Okay, then so let me just say what this model is talking about. So this first term is basically, it's giving us the kinetic energy of these electrons. Let's say T is the T, basically the larger the T, larger the kinetic energy. T is the parameter which tells us that how much of energy is available for the fermions to go from one side to another side. As you can see that there's an annihilation operator acting on Ci plus one side, which basically means that electron has got annihilated, which means it has moved from I plus 1th side to the ith side. Okay, that's so it basically means this is the quantum motion. The electron has moved from one side to the another side. Same, and then the reverse process, Hermitian conjugate. So this term basically tells us that how much energy these electrons have. Okay, as I said, the absolute magnitude of the T tells us that gives us the measure of the kinetic energy. Then this term, you will see, this is we call it superconducting term, because this can happen only in superconductors. This process, what is happening here, we are simultaneously creating two particles. Okay, one at one side and another at another side. Okay, so this happens to it is very similar to what we have. It's basically related to Cooper pair formation. And this happens, this Cooper pair formation, as we know, it all only happens in a superconducting. So you can have these two creation, and similarly in Hermitian conjugate two annihilation. These kind of processes only happen in superconductors. Okay, so that's why we call it superconducting term. Then we have another term which basically tells us that on a given side, how much of energy do you take for putting two electrons on a given side. So this is called chemical potential, and it's this tells us that about the free energy of these free energy which you take to put the two electrons together. Okay, so this is what we call as Kitae chain model. And what is very interesting about Kitae's work, what Kitae showed us, that he gave us a representation, he gave us a way to basically without doing other transformations, he just gave us another way of doing the transformation. And then using that transformation, we will be able to diagonalize this Hamiltonian. What does that mean? That means we will be able to get the ground state of this eigenstate, which is especially the ground state for this model, as well as the eigenspectrum of this model. Okay, so what is that transformation? That is the same transformation which we did earlier. Okay, he said, let's go, these model has been written in terms of C operators. What we can do is that we can basically write them in terms of Majorana operators. And if you go from C operators to the Majorana operators, things become a lot easier. Okay, things, in some regimes it automatically becomes diagonal. Okay, so that was one of the brilliant, I would say, uh, 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 representations introduced by brilliant idea from Kitai, Alexei Kitai, to go to this representation. Algebraically, what it means is that it means basically going from Grassmann algebra to Clifford algebra. In some sense, the Clifford algebra suits this model better. In some sense, the algebra, algebraically, this is closer to Clifford algebra. This model, or what's the ground state, or even excitation spectrum of this model, is closer to the Clifford algebra. And I think that's the reason when we shift to Clifford algebra, to the Majorana fermion representation, we basically get this model kind of in a more or less diagonal form. Okay, so if we just plug in these representations over here, we just replace every Ci and Ci plus 1 by these Majorana operators, what we end up getting is this Hamiltonian. So this Hamiltonian and this Hamiltonian are basically same. It's just that this is in C representation and this is in Majorana representation. Okay, now even if we look at here, what is happening, very interesting. What's happening is that that Majorana, I will show it pictorially, that's better. What's happening here, you will see that, let's look at this particular picture. What's happening, we have this circle over here basically shows that there are two Majoranas at each side. The circle, the gray circle, basically tells us that this is a side, this represents a side, and at every side we have two Majoranas, Majorana number 1, Majorana number 2, which are being called here as A and B at the side number 1. Okay, so what is happening is that, in an interesting situation, that the Majorana number B is getting connected to the Majorana number A, Majorana A of the second side. Okay, while as the Majorana 1, first Majorana, remains as such, it does not get coupled. Okay, so similarly it keeps on happening throughout the whole chain, and the last two Majorana operators, Majoranas, they do not get coupled. Okay, this is one interesting situation. Other possibility is that it may also happen that you have these Majoranas, they get coupled with each other, but then it does not leave us, we call it a trivial phase. This phase is not interesting for us. It's actually this particular phase which is interesting for us. Okay, so that's why this phase we call it trivial phase, and this is called the topological phase. And however, both these phases, both these situations which we look at here, are the ground states of both are the phases of the Hamiltonian, Kitai Hamiltonian. But as we see, we have a parameter space here. We have 3 parameters to tune. So depending on the tunings, as we can tune these 3 parameters, we can go from trivial region to the topological region. Okay, so here you will see, if you want to look at the operator level also, you will see what's happening here. The Majorana number 1 at one side actually gets coupled to the Majorana number 2 at another side. Okay, so this coupling is a very interesting, plays a very interesting role. Okay, here I also want to I want to introduce another property which is called the parity. Parity basically tells us that because for Majorana fermions we do not have the number operator, which basically means we cannot count the number of the fermions. It's not possible to tell us that there are these many number of Majoranas present. That's not possible. Number operator is not defined for Majoranas. What we can do instead is, because Majoranas have the Z2 symmetry, we can say whether the number of the fermions is even or is it odd. The evenness or the oddness is still something which we can define for the Majoranas. Okay, so evenness and oddness, let's represent them and eigenvalues 1 and -1. Okay, as 2 eigenvalues of an operator which is called the parity operator. So like as we have number operator for Majorana for C complex fermions, here in Majoranas we have a parity operator, and parity operator just basically it just allows you to identify the evenness and the oddness of these Majoranas. Okay, now you may say, I want to give a physical example of how will you may think how will we identify the evenness and oddness of the Majoranas. Okay, let me give you a very important example. So when you are in a superconductor. So in a superconductor, as long as you can always pump in or you can take away the Cooper pairs, the superconductor does not feel that. So you can just, because it's at a particular, it's below the excitation state. So as long as we do not break the Cooper pair into two parts, the superconductor does not know that something is happening to it. So as long as you keep on putting things in Cooper pairs in the form of the pairs, superconductor does not know what's going on. So that's what. So if you put it two electrons, I mean Cooper pairs, which is a two particles. So as long as you do not, so in that sense, you are in the even state. You are just putting two particles inside. Okay. So however, when you break Cooper pair, it's basically, it means you are going from even state to the odd state. That is something which superconductor notices, because it takes energy to break the Cooper pair. So energetically speaking, the superconductor never knows that as long as it's in even state, it does not know what is the number of the, it does not, in technically speaking, it does not feel the number fluctuation. Okay, so whatever number fluctuation happens, it happens, but the superconductor does not feel. What superconductor knows about energetically is when it goes from even state to the odd state, which happens physically by the breaking of the Cooper pair. Okay, or if you just inject a single fermion, it will notice it. Okay, that is what, so in a superconductor we call it modulo 2 symmetry. Okay, modulo 2 number symmetry. Okay, so which is basically the same thing as I was talking about, the parity symmetry. And this parity is not like some reflection symmetry. It's rather, even if you think of it a reflection, it's a number space rather than in actual physical space. Okay, so this is now we want to talk about this Kitai chain model in a interesting situation. We cannot, I mean, it will take some machinery to solve this model for a full parameter regime, but rather we want to take this specific this special regime, which is where mu is equal to 0 and t is equal to delta. Okay, if you plug in these numbers here, what you will end up getting is like, as this mu will 0, so this term will go. So then we will have these two terms, and they're very similar to each other. So, and we are putting delta and t basically same. So ultimately we end up getting only one term. And as you can see, this term is already, it's a quadratic term. It will be easy for us to diagonalize it. Okay, so in fact Kitai showed us how to diagonalize this term. It's very easy to diagonalize here. That's what we do. So what we have, it's already in a diagonal form, in fact. So but what is happening in this Hamiltonian in third, and is you have, as I showed it pictorially, that we have the Majorana number 1 getting coupled to the Majorana number 2. So for the special case of this parameter regime where mu is equal to 0 and t is equal to delta, what we are going to get is a situation like this. Okay, these guys. Okay, and in this situation what happens is that we are left with these two Majorana operators. We call them Majorana mode operators. Okay, to just tell them that they are not exactly they don't behave like particles, free particles. So these are like quasi particles, and these we call them Majorana mode operators. But one may think, okay, these two Majorana operators, they are separated from each other, they are like independent, but that's not the case. What we can what basically is true physically is that these two Majorana mode operators are actually parts of the same particle. Okay, we can think of that we have a single particle in some sense, which is a non-local particle, which is basically spanning the whole chain. And these two guys are some sort of components, two pieces of the same particle, as if it's the same particle which has got split into two pieces, and these two pieces are at two edges. Okay, now here I want to highlight something. Here is what we in physics call it topology. So first thing, these two Majorana mode operators, they are not it's not a property of a single site. It's not a property of something which is happening on an edge, or rather it is the property of the whole system. The edge operators only appear because of the properties of the whole system, or in other words, because something is happening in the bulk. What is happening in the bulk? What's happening is that this particular form of the coupling is happening. If this form of the coupling will not happen in the bulk, we will not have these edge operators. Okay, so this is a very interesting property in many physical systems, including the black holes, that they have this holographic property, which basically means that you have the bulk and edge duality, bulk and edge relationship, that what's happening in the bulk is basically gets manifested at the edge. Okay, and what's happening at the edge is not independent of what's happening in the bulk. Okay, so now we have got, so what we have seen is that if we take this Kitai chain Hamiltonian, the Kitai chain Hamiltonian as a solution, as one of the physical state of this model, is that we get these kind of states, we get these kind of operators. Okay, and we will these are the Majorana mode operators, and what happens to them is that now here only what I want to just at least mention is that they are topologically protected. What does that mean? That means as long as you have this Z2 symmetry present, you have this parity symmetry present in the system, you cannot do perturbations to get rid of these edge modes. They will be there. Okay, so as long as you do not change the basic, I would say, properties of the system, like as basic symmetries of the system, you are not going to change. It is very similar to in a way we will say like as in topology we say we want to do these continuous deformations, and if there is a hole or there's some defect inside the system, we cannot just get rid of those by continuous deformations. So that's what here also we're saying. But any local perturbation basically means any sort of continuous deformation, because perturbation will mean is a small change, a small continuous change. A small continuous change is not going to get rid of these edge modes, whatever you do, as long as you do not change the basic symmetries of the system, they are going to here. Okay, that's why these are the global properties, that's where their stability comes in. So these edge modes are very, very stable, nothing happens to them. Now I will come back to the question which I talked about in my abstract. Now the question in quantum system, in quantum computation is, okay, now we want to store our quantum information somewhere, we want to store it in quantum systems. But the problem with the quantum systems is that you store their information, they get coupled to the environment, there's an electric field applied, magnetic field, or there's some other thermal fluctuation happening, so the information gets basically eroded. It just gets you just lose the information. Okay, however here now we have an opportunity here. That's why Kitai was interested in these systems, that if we just encode this information in these in the qubit, the qubit we will get from these two guys, the one here and one here. And as I just said, that these two edge modes are very, very robust to any local perturbation, any continuous deformation in the system. Okay, so if we encode our information in this system, we are almost sure that nothing is going to happen to the information. Okay, this particular encoding or this particular way of storing information is called topological. Topological basically here means that it will not be taken unless and until you break the whole system, unless and until you change the whole system, nothing is going to happen to the information encoded in the qubit. Okay, and you will see, as you can see, this is a non-local, this qubit is non-local, this is not local, like as we have a qubit here also, or we have a qubit here in fact. But this qubit it lies, this whole both the states, both the particles lie on a single site. So this is a local qubit. But problem with these local qubits is that they are prone to perturbations. But here we have this non-local qubit, and this non-local qubit is not is not susceptible or vulnerable to local perturbations. So that is why we are interested in these kind of particles. That's why we were looking for such kind of modes, such kind of operators, such kind of particles within which we can encode our information. When we have information, then we can do other processes of quantum computation also. So that's the reason. So that's why we were interested in Majorana fermions, and these guys are the Majorana edge modes. We call them edge modes. We call them Majorana these operators, Majorana modes or something. But these are this is what if we look at now what the way at least topological quantum computation is being done, that's being done using these these modes. Okay, as you can kind of imagine, this is not going to be easy to deal with these, because there are two edges. It's going to be very difficult. Okay, and however they give us a promise that if we do quantum computation in them, our information is going to be kind of it's going to be protected. Okay, I'm ignoring some of the thermal fluctuations, but that's another thing which we can talk about, or that's something which that needs to be taken into consideration. But what is really what is really guaranteed here is that it is safe from the local perturbations. Okay. Plus there's an additional bonus which we are not we don't have scope for talking about, that which is called a quantum error correction. Okay, so this topological way of storing the information also guarantees that we can take care of quantum error correction also. Like, as if we have errors, we have always errors in computing processes. So in the ways we store information, there may be bit flips or something. So there is, it also guarantees that we can do this quantum error correction also. That's why this is promising. There's a lot of interest in topological way of doing quantum computation. Okay, so if I want to summarize here, what I have done till now is basically showed you that following the Kitae, that there are ways of realizing some particles, some ways of some implementations of qubit which give us a very robust way of storing the quantum information. Okay, now we are in the rest of the talk, we're going to explore more properties of these particles. Okay, so yeah, here I just want to just highlight there's a bit of an algebra here, but basically what I'm trying to say over here is that this Hamiltonian, basically the Hamiltonian for this system, okay, the Hamiltonian for this system is given here, is given in equation 13, and then we changed it and just written it in a different way, and we in equation 15. So the important property of the equation 15, or the Hamiltonian equation 15, is it has double degeneracy. Okay, it has two ground states which we need for quantum computation. We need a qubit. And what are these two ground states? These are two ground states with two parities. One is the even parity, one is the odd parity. Okay, so that's what I would like to say here. And then we move on and talk about other properties of these Majorana mode operators. Okay, so there are just some. So here I want to say, now what I want to highlight here is these Majorana, we call them Majorana zero modes here. So they are basically actually the actual category they belong to are called anyons. Okay, so there are bosons, there are fermions, depending on their exchange statistics, the way they interact with each other. So these Majorana mode operators, to be more precise, are anyons. And what anyon means? Anyon means if we take apart anyon and just you loop around another anyon around the first one, what you are going to pick up is a phase factor, which basically means you are not going to return to the same quantum state with which you started. Okay, it's very similar to in differential geometry we talk about parallel transport, and because of the curvature you don't come to the same point you have started with. Okay, so there's always that curvature coming in. This is very related to that. This is very much, in fact, the way we understand it in physics is we say that as you loop around, you pick up something called a Berry phase. But Berry phase is some sort of, it's some sort of a curvature. Berry phase, from Berry phase there's a then Berry curvature. It's a curvature in the quantum state space. Like, as we have a quantum state space, it has a differential geometric structure. So in that quantum state space, you basically pick up a curvature as if we have non-zero Berry phase. Okay, so these particles are called anyons. Okay, and earlier on, why are we finding them? So earlier the search for the anyons was happening in quantum Hall Felvidus. That was the first example. What Kitae did for us is that he shifted our attention from quantum Hall Felvidus to topological superconductors. And as of now, there's a lot of research that has been going on, I think, in the last decade, where people are trying to find these anyons in these topological superconductors. Okay, what is an interesting property? We will come to that. The interesting property of these anyons, or the Majorana fermions, which we have introduced, have is their braiding property. So when they move around, as any particle will move, so they two particles, they will exchange the paths with each other. Then they have these they braid their world lines, so-called world lines. There are the paths, in fact, or the trajectories of the paths basically form the braids. Okay, so or in mathematically speaking, they give the braid representation. They give the representation of the unitary representation of the braid group. Okay, so these are the things which we are going to kind of talk about. But let us go slightly slow. Here we just want to say, where are these properties coming from? Or in other words, why does Majorana fermion behave as an anyon? where its braiding properties or other things coming, where are they coming from? Okay, so to understand that, we have to also see, look at the more closely at the algebra of these Majorana fermions. Though we know that it's a Clifford algebra, but I think the Clifford algebra here has many physical consequences. In this slide, we just want to talk about one of those consequences. Okay, so what we are going to see is here we have just take a set of only 3 Majorana fermions. Okay, B1, B2, B3 are they are 3 Majorana fermions. Okay, and I have written down a Hamiltonian. Hamiltonian means we are just writing the pairing terms between these Majorana fermions. Now, even when I write this Hamiltonian, what I can also define is another symmetry operator for this Hamiltonian. The symmetry operator looks like this. Okay, because I have 3 Majoranas available to me, so I can write down this Hamiltonian. This operator, gamma operator, I call it. So it's B1, B2, B3, then some normalization factor, and you will see what is this gamma operator. What are its properties? So if we say, if you scale this one, it scales to 1. Okay, then what it also does is that it commutes with each Majorana operator. That's good. And then it also commutes with this Hamiltonian, which basically makes it a symmetry operator. In quantum mechanics, what we say that if you have any operator which commutes with the Hamiltonian of the system, it becomes a symmetry operator of that system. Okay, so that way, what we have found here for this particular Hamiltonian, very simple Hamiltonian, we have found that this gamma operator actually acts as a symmetry operator. But one may ask, we have already talked about that these Majorana Hamiltonians have parity symmetry. So how are these two different symmetry operators behaving with each other? How do they interact? Okay, so what is interesting to note is that they do not this gamma operator does not commute with a parity operator, which is obvious because these are two different symmetry operators, so they are not supposed to commute with each other. Rather, what happens is that they anti-commute with each other. So what is the consequence of that anti-commutation? The consequence of that anti-commutation is that basically, if your system is in a one parity state, what this gamma operator is going to do, had it commuted with the parity operator, it would have put the state in the same parity state. It would not have changed it. But because it is anti-commuting, so it's changing the sign. Okay, it's changing the sign. So basically, it means it is taking the state from even parity to the odd parity. So this gamma operator, in some sense, is acting as some kind of a fluctuation operator. It just takes you from one state to the another state. Okay, that's what it is doing. And so, but what it also means is that, so it's basically meaning that it ensures, at least for this Hamiltonian, that let's say you have the even state, because of the gamma operator, there must be another state also corresponding to the even state. There must be another state which is the odd state. So it is introducing this double degeneracy automatically. So the fact that this Hamiltonian has this symmetry basically means that there has to be this double degeneracy. That's why we call it sometimes algebra of Majorana doubling, because in the Majorana fermions, this particular symmetry operator leads to the double degeneracy. And typically, how do we get degeneracies in quantum systems? We get them via some sort of global symmetries or some sort of symmetries in the quantum system. Okay, here we have as different sort of a symmetry, which is a global symmetry. It's a global operator because it's made up of all the Majorana fermions and it commutes with all the Majoranas themselves. Okay, so it's a global symmetry of the system, different kind of a symmetry, I would call it. And then it commutes with a parity operator, which basically leads to the degeneracy. So it's a different sort of a degeneracy which is coming from this symmetry operator, the global symmetry operator. Okay. Yeah, so now why I'm saying is that it is different, because you see, if we just look at the symmetries of this system, we know it had this Z2 symmetry. Okay, that was the only symmetry which we had noticed earlier. So this, we had not noticed that it has this symmetry also. So that's why so it's not coming from this double degeneracy, is not I would say it's not coming from just from the Z2 symmetry. Rather, the fact that it has some emergent symmetry also. This emergent symmetry makes sure that there is double degeneracy. So we can say, we can summarize that for Majorana fermion Hamiltonian is, not only do we have the usual Z2 symmetries, which it has, because it, as we remember, let's say for a case of Kitai chain, we can get it from quantumizing model. Quantumizing model has Z2 symmetry. Kitai chain also has a Z2 symmetry. So, however, for the Kitai chain, there are extra symmetries. For the Majorana fermion Hamiltonian is, what we are trying to say over here is that they have extra symmetries. And for the simplest case, to depict it, for the simplest case, we can show that it has this extra emergent operator. And this operator, interestingly, behaves very similar to the Majorana operator itself, because Majorana also squares to 1, and this is also very similar to them. That's why some people call it emergent Majorana. Okay. So what we are going to, what we saw here in this particular slide is basically for the Majorana fermion for Hamiltonians, or the Majorana fermions, their algebraic properties basically allow them to have extra symmetries. Okay, and that leads to the double degeneracy, that leads to their topological properties. Okay, that was a highlight of this slide. Going ahead, now we may ask the question. Okay, we may ask the question, yeah, before I go here, so we may ask the question, can we generalize this one? Can we generalize, is it true for only for this particular Hamiltonian over here with the 3 Majoranas, or it's true for any general arbitrary Hamiltonian? So the obvious, I mean, I would say rather the answer which we have found this one for this question is that it is true for any odd number of Majorana, any Hamiltonian, any system which has odd number of Majorana, it can be easily generalized. You can have the same situation with any arbitrary odd number of Majoranas. Okay, so whenever you have such a system, it basically means it will have these double degeneracy. So as well as we have these global symmetry operators. In fact, for if you have larger number of Majorana fermions, it basically means we will have more symmetries, more emergent symmetries. Like as the one we over here, we had just one symmetry, one extra symmetry operator. Now there are questions which are related to something called a topological order, but I think for now I will not delve into it. I will just say that these Majorana fermions, if we have these Majorana fermion operators, they will also have something called a topological order, but we will not go into that details. But for the Kitai chain, I will just mention that we know that it has something called a short range or the Z2 topological order. Okay. Now we want to now here is something we want to highlight what we have learned till now. So now we ask the question. Let us say I want to have a quantum system in which I want to have the states of this quantum system should be topologically protected. So what is the bare minimum of these symmetries or whatever is needed to get that topological degeneracy, or what is the bare minimum of symmetries that are needed to get these topological protection? Okay, here we said there's an elegant way of understanding it and arriving at what do we need to get the topological protection. Okay, so we will say, let us introduce these two operators, rather two sets of operators. Let's call them, one we call P symmetry operators and another we call Q symmetry operators. And equation 17 basically tells us what they should satisfy to arrive at. We will see. Let's do it this way. We'll first of all look at these equations. So here it basically means both P and Q, they are the symmetry operators because both of them commute with the Hamiltonian. Okay. Then the P and Q, they are two different symmetry operators. They should anticommute among themselves, like the way we just saw in the 3 Majorana fermion case. Okay. So we should have a situation where P and Q anticommute with each other. Then for the double degeneracy, if we just need double degeneracy, it should also mean that P and Q, both of them should scale to 0. Okay, if you have these three sets of properties, let's see what happens. What will happen if we have this kind of thing? One of the immediate consequences is following. Let's say we apply by P operator on psi. Let's say it's an eigenstate of P operator. Psi is an eigenstate of P operator. Then because Q and now we will operate by Q. Okay, so what we get is following. Because we P and Q anticommute, what will happen is that, so we operate by Q, so what we can get, PQ is equal to minus times minus EQ. So it basically means that for the P operator, Q psi is once again, there is going to be another eigenstate. The only difference is going to be that there will be the eigenvalue will be different. So if P and Q anti-commute with each other, it basically means that P, there will be two states. One we will call just psi, another will be the Q psi. The only difference between them will be that they are going to have different eigenvalues. So the fact that P and Q anti-commute with each other ensures that we will have the states which will have different eigenvalues. The only difference is it's basically doubling in the sense that the only difference is that they are going to be opposite of each other. One will have the eigenvalue m, another will have eigenvalue minus m. Okay, so if we have these properties, just these properties, this is very I think powerful, that if you just any quantum system, if we can find these properties, it's going to give us these degeneracies. Now this degeneracy, getting degeneracy is not difficult, but these degeneracies which we are talking about are topological degeneracies, which basically means they are topologically protected. Okay, because as I said earlier, these symmetries, because this particular symmetry, you will not get these kind of behavior from any local symmetry, from the usual, like as in the local symmetry we have U1, SU2, they can be easily, any local perturbation basically takes them away, basically breaks the degeneracy. Okay, however, for topological case, for such a scenario, what will happen is that local perturbation is not going to take them away. Okay, so that is why, so this algebra is very important, because to us it gives us a prescription for looking around in quantum systems and finding the situations which will satisfy this algebra, because then it will mean we will get the topological protection. And if we just list the cases where we have topological protection, you will see, I mean, the cases which I have checked, they always satisfy these kind of algebraic properties. Like as toric code is one good example, which we use as a situation to talk about the anyons, and which was another model which was introduced by Alexei Kitaev, toric code. That also you will see, you can always find these symmetry operators which commute with each other, and simultaneously they anti-commute with, they will have these symmetry operators which commute with the Hamiltonian, but simultaneously they anti-commute with each other. So in that sense, this particular framework tells us that gives us an algebraic route or other to arrive at topological protection. Therefore, I think this particular formalism is pretty robust, and there needs to be a lot more work to be done to apply it to many different cases, and in fact investigate it or do more research on it. But however, what is really important is that this very simple algebraic requirements are there. We can use this prescription to arrive at quantum state. So what is the significance of it? The significance of it is that it tries to address the question of how to get these protected quantum states to do quantum computation. As I said earlier, that this is one of the very important challenges in quantum computation. So the formalism over here, in fact, gives us the beginning of taking a route to arrive at situations or at quantum systems which will have these topological protection. Okay, so yeah, let's go ahead. Okay, yeah, here I am just showing that I mean, earlier we asked the question, whatever we saw for 3 Majorana fermions, is it possible to generalize it to arbitrary number of Majorana fermions? So what we have done is we have generalized our calculation to like is odd number of Majorana fermions, like is 2n plus 1. Okay, so if we take even 2n plus 1 Majorana fermions, so they will have a vector space of the dimensionality 2 raised to 2n plus 1. Okay, and same number of generators will be there. Some of them are listed here, 1 gamma 2 all the way gamma. Then we have these bivectors, then trivectors, goes on and on. Then we have the final operator, which will be the product of all the Majorana operators. Okay, now if we write down a simplest Hamiltonian for such a situation, once again the pairing Hamiltonian, and which will have surely a Z2 symmetry. Now what we will find is that we can define a gamma operator, that this gamma operator is going to obviously commute with a Hamiltonian because it's a product of all the operators. Okay, so it's going to, so automatically we find that whenever we write down a Hamiltonian for such a system, we will have these global symmetries. Okay, and because of the global symmetries, and also it has a Z2 parity symmetry, so what happens is that you will see we can satisfy what I showed here. So we're basically trying to design here a system in which we can find an implementation of this algebraic structure for topological protection. And here we are just basically pinpointing one of the such systems, though we will have to think about, if we want to do an engineering implementation, we want actual laboratory implementation of such a system, we may have to give a thought to it. How do we implement it? However, theoretically speaking or mathematically speaking, I think it's just to illustrate as a proof of concept, to tell us that there is a possibility, there are systems where we can use this algebraic structure gives us way to arrive at these topological protection. So this was just to illustrate that we can take the system of odd number of Majorana fermions, and for them it is possible to get this topological protection. Okay, so that's why we just talked about it. Okay, now we want to shift to another aspect of Majorana fermions. So the one we were just highlighting was that whenever we have Majorana fermions, because of the global symmetries present in the system, we get this topological protection, which is very, very important. Now another aspect of Majorana fermions, which may be of some interest to the audience for this conference, which was about knots and the braids and other things. So I want to say that these Majorana fermions, the guys I was talking about, these edge modes and all that, okay, using these operators, okay, we can write down a new representation of the braid group. First of all, here, this is for the definition of, we know it, so but just still to go over it. This is the definition of the braid group. These are the braid group generators, and this is the definition of the braid group. Here, immediately we write down one representation of these Majoranas. Okay, so this gamma 1 and gamma 1, these are the same Majorana operators which satisfy Clifford algebra, and because of the Clifford algebra, we can expand this exponential and write down it in this particular form. Okay, and we can see that they satisfy the, let's go over and see how do they satisfy the braid relationships. Okay, let's work out one of them. Okay, so this one is rather obvious, okay, because of their intercommuting nature, it's obvious. But however, let's go over the second one. Okay, now we can write down this braid operator here, and this we can also see that this particular operator gamma k, it has this interesting property. It's k raised to -1. Okay, and yeah, it intercommutes. And then because of these properties, you will see that if we just work out, we will find out that it satisfies this Yang-Baxter equation. Okay, so the Majorana fermions, what we are saying here is that Majorana fermions also have these braiding properties. As we said that Majoranas are anyons, so they have to have these braiding properties, and here is one kind of a illustration of their braiding properties. So but interesting to note over here is that the represent now the question one may ask is that the representation which we get in terms of Majoranas, is it same what we get in terms of the Pauli operators, the representation which we get for, say, Supin systems like as Heisenberg model, or people have studied Potts model, Ising model, and they have used the Yang-Baxter equation, they have got a representation for that. It turns out that it is not the same representation. So it means basically that we have found a new representation of the braid group in terms of the Majorana fermions. So okay, because of these, you see what's happening here. No, you have these very interesting properties. Like if we just call it gamma k, this part of this operator, these pairs, so they have these interesting properties. And if we come here, you will see they have some interesting properties. Okay, and if we write in now, yeah, I have to also mention that this representation was given by another Russian physicist. His name was Ivanov. So Ivanov came up with this representation. In fact, he showed that we can use these Majorana fermions to Majorana mode operators, which we are talking about, to arrive at the braid group representation. Okay, so we revisited that Ivanov representation and showed some more interesting physical mathematical algebraic properties. And here we are given one matrix representation of the in the Bell matrix form of this braid operator. Okay. There is I would say there's a connection to one may also say, because see this, we are getting here braiding, we're getting braiding properties, but simultaneously these are all quantum operators. So one may ask the question, what is the relationship between the braiding here, the knottedness, the knot properties, and the quantum entanglement, because quantum entanglement basically is a way of entangling the quantum states. It just in some sense braids them together, knots them together. So what is the relation? So that is also something which we have, I think, in another place we have explored that, and there is surely a relationship between these two sorts of entanglements over here. Okay, so and we see, because these Majorana operators, they themselves exist or appear in manifest in systems which have the quantum entanglement, then these themselves have the braiding properties also. Okay, so I think there is a that connection which I think Professor Kaufman and his collaborators have also explored in other places. So here I want, this is something, one of my favorite consequences, algebraic consequences of these operators, Majorana operators. So is that we also get, not only is that, I mean, it's related though, but I think this is a very beautiful representation of the temporally Lieb algebra. Okay, so what we also arrive here is if we write down, like, let's start it here. We define A and B as two operators. A is gamma 1 and gamma I plus 1, and this is like just, this is one, these are both of them are nearest neighbors, but here we are taking gamma and the nearest neighbor on its right side, so to speak, and on the B operator is the gamma, another gamma is on its left side. Okay, then we can immediately check that A square and B, both of them square to -1, which is interesting. So then we can write down braid operators in this form. As we remember from here, we had our braid representation here this way. So the braid representation looks like 1 by √2, then 1 plus then this pair of Majoranas. Okay, so same is here happening here. So U and U, we write down V. Then what we find is that automatically we get 2 here. U square is to 2U, V square is to 2V. V square is to V, and then we have these interesting braid relationships. Okay, U V U is like this, gives us V, and then this one. So then we use the only shift over here to be noticed is that we have just added iota over here. Okay, then we get your UK, and it satisfies these temporally Lieb algebra relationships. So this is also interesting to note that we have these new representation for both braid group as well as the temporary Lieb algebra. Here I have one thing to point out is that if we look at, if we go back to the braid group representation, if we have this braid group representation here, you see we have this these operators gamma I plus I, and I don't know what is this particular piece over here, what does it physically correspond to. However, when we go to the temporally Lieb algebra, we know that what does this correspond to. It corresponds to the local parity. Like, as if we can always, for two Majorana operators, we can always define a parity operator. Okay, so for the, let's say we have a chain of the Majoranas, and for a pair of Majoranas we can define this this one local parity operator. Okay, so this is an interesting connection which we have noticed, that when we come to the temporally Lieb representation, we have these local parity operators coming in. In some sense, it basically means that now we can do the parity measurements. Okay, and we can in fact write down projection operators over here for the parity eigenstates. So it turns out that this is something that needs to be worked out, that there is some research that needs to be done here. But however, this connection is obvious, that there is a relationship between the temporally Lieb algebra as well as the local parity operators, and which to me is very, very interesting, because typically it's very difficult to deal with these Majoranas or to move them around. So what people have proposed, what researchers have proposed, is that we must be doing some measurement based computation for Majorana fermions also. And here is in fact as a way, because we can get these, this is a parity operator, and we can use these. It is in some sense telling us that using the parity operators, we can get over to the temporally Lieb algebra, and temporally algebra is definitely related to the braiding. So in some sense, what it is suggesting us that local parity operator has something to do with the braiding also. But this is a point. This is, as I said, this is something we have not explored it in detail, but this is something which I would like to highlight. And yeah. Yeah, here then we go on, and finally what we do here is that we want to say we want to write down it's like some sort of a Yang Baxterization of the Hamiltonian. Okay, it's like if we start from this braiding operator, is there a way to arrive at the Hamiltonian? And I think it's an very interesting approach. In fact, this research was inspired by some other work by some Chinese researchers. Okay. And that's the idea over here, that if you start from this particular breeding operator, how do we arrive at, and it will definitely satisfy this Yang-Baxter equation. Then we want to apply, this is our Schrodinger equation, and what we want to do is that we want to apply this operator, this breeding operator over here, and do the work out the Schrodinger equation again. Okay, so when we work out the details, I just want to highlight the final thing. So is we arrive at the Hamiltonian. This is a very interesting way of arriving at Hamiltonian. Basically, it's taking a reverse route. The route which we have taken, we have started with the Hamiltonian, and then we showed that we can get the breeding operators, we can get the breeding representation. Here we are taking the inverse route, where what we say, let us start these Majorana operators and show that they have these breeding properties, and then arrive at the Hamiltonian. I think there is some sort of subtlety over here, that because we are arriving at a Hamiltonian, it some sense says that the breeding alone in some sense determines the Hamiltonian. Okay, so it's very interesting to be noted here, but I think I will not go into too much details about it. So that's the only thing which I say, is that we can arrive at the starting from here, from the breeding operator, which definitely satisfies the Yang-Baxter. We can taking the Schrodinger equation route, we can arrive at the Hamiltonian here. Okay, so and then it will have both the phases depending on the theta parameter, theta 1 and theta 2 dot. Depending on that, it will have both the parameters. Okay, so finally, I just want to summarize that what we have talked about is we started with a kind of a usual fermions, and we found that there's even algebraically, there's a way to get the new Majorana operators. Okay, these Majorana operators, one difference from the usual fermions is that they satisfy Clifford algebra. Okay, and then we found that if we go ahead and write down these Majorana operators and the Hamiltonians for them, they have the global symmetries, and because of that, these systems always have the topological degenerate ground states. Okay, and that's what we are after, because for quantum computation we need systems where we can get these topologically protected ground states. Okay, and then we also later on we showed that the same thing what we happens for the 3 Majorana, same thing happens also for any odd number of Majorana fermions. Okay, and then we also presented an algebraic structure which can be used as some sort of prescription, algebraic prescription, to arrive at systems, or to detect, or to or even design systems where we can get that topological degeneracy. Okay, so we presented that algebraic structure, and later on we looked at the breeding properties of the Majorana fermions. We found that the Majorana fermions offer a type 2 different kind of a representation of the Yang-Baxter equation, a different kind of a braid group representation. And then finally, we found that it's also possible to start from the braiding representation, from the braid group operator, and arrive at the Hamiltonian. Like as the Kitai had taken a different route, but here it is also possible to start from the braid group representation, braid group operator, and arrive at at Hamiltonian. I think, and this work is reported here in this arXiv paper, and I think we have recently updated this paper. There are more things that have come into the arXiv version. So I think I'll stop here. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to take them.
Thank you very much for your talk. It was really interesting, and you explained a lot of details, really. So please, questions?
I have a question. If we are thinking of the braiding as the braiding of the nanowire strings, like nanowires, with strings of fermions and the Majoranas at the ends of the strings, the bulk and boundary, then when you braid, you change the correlation between the string ends. But Cohenhaven and those people have worked out experimental measures for measuring the correlations at the string ends. So it may be that an extension of their experimental methods would enable the detection of the braiding. Do you know if anybody has tried this?
Okay, now, so first of all, I want to get it. So you are saying that we have these the edge modes at the end of the nanowire, and then we try to get the braiding, do the braiding of these Majorana edge modes. So as has been done in this experiment.
Right.
So
we want to detect the phase change under the braiding of the Majorana edge modes.
Okay, the phase change. Okay, no, I am not aware of any experiment no, which has detected these phase changes, because
I mean, in order, yeah, but don't jump ahead of me. I'm asking a specific question. Cohenhagen and his group measure the correlations between, let's call them strings, the nanowire. All right, so you have a string and a correlation between the Majorana ends of that string. It's really one large particle, as you say, and you're measuring that end correlation. If you let two of these strings wind around one another to braid, then the end correlations will change. In reality, they'll change, but whether that can be measured or not is the question. And since these people have made a step in the direction of measuring that kind of correlation, so it's possible that they can make a further step and measure the correlation in the braiding. I wonder if they have thought of that. If I can think of it, they can think of it. They may have written papers about it already. I wondered if you knew.
No. So I am not aware of these experiments, whether they have been able to do, because they, as far as I know, they are saying that they're getting it. No, they're feeling it very difficult to get these braidings done. In fact, there were suggestions to avoid braidings and rather than focus on this one, which I mentioned, measurement-based computation, measurement-based topological quantum computation, because doing the braidings themselves is in a lab, it's very difficult to do them physically.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes.
So it's not going to be easy. It's not obviously easy to make any kind of quantum computers at this stage from this.
Not the topological one. I think people are making progress on the other ones, other approach to quantum computation. But however, there are challenges on the topological side.
Well, that was my question. Are there other questions? Okay, well, let's thank Rukshan. Yeah?
I think.
Yeah, someone said.
Professor Wesnin was saying something.
Yeah. I would like to know if there is some meaning for virtual braid groups in this context. So you arrive to braid group, and is there some special meaning if for the case of virtual braid groups?
Oh, virtual braid group.
Yes.
It isn't obvious to me what the virtual braid group will do here, because what does the virtual crossing mean?
I don't know if somebody tried to understand.
What does the virtual crossing mean physically? We come a little closer to a physical interpretation of the virtual crossing if you go to the welded braid group, because then you can think of the particles as little circles moving around in space, and they can either pass by one another or they can pass through one another, right?
Yes.
And so you have the distinction between virtual and ordinary in terms of anionic circles. Now, I don't know whether anybody has any further ideas about interpreting little braidings of little strings. This was a preoccupation of some physicists some years ago. Balachandran was very interested in the welded braid group because of that.
Sorry.
But the virtual braid group seems a little farther from the physics.
Please, can you repeat the name who studied welded groups in this context?
I'm sorry?
You talked about somebody who tried to understand the welded braid group. Can you please repeat the name?
I'm sorry, I have trouble hearing you.
Okay.
But
No. Okay.
I'll repeat what I said.
Mm-hmm.
The welded braid group of Rourke, Fenn, and Rimiani can be interpreted in terms of motion group of circles moving around in space. Yeah. And little circles can be thought of as anionic particles from some people's physical point of view, but they don't have real world interpretations of things like that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. On the other hand, if you're just designing gates, as sometimes we do when we're thinking about quantum computing, then you can talk about a swap gate, a gate that interchanges two tensor factors. And the virtual crossing can be thought of as simply a swap gate and add it to the rest of the structure that you're thinking about. So you can work with the virtual braid group in relation to quantum information. It just is more at a more artificial level of compositions of possible gates.
Okay.
But maybe Rukshan, you had something to say to that. I overrode.
No. I don't have much idea about virtual braid groups. So, but I think as you mentioned that you are saying that the motion of the circle is, then that looks suggestive about with the anyons. So maybe one should.
Yeah, that's a very pretty bit of geometry, because if you're moving circles around in space, you see, then two circles could interchange by just crossing without going through one another. Or one of them could decide to go through the middle of the other one as they interchange. So there's two basic kinds of interchange. That's two kinds of braiding, two kinds of elementary braiding. And the compositional structure of that is called the welded braid group. After the fact. The people who invented the welded braid group had a more algebraic problem in mind.
Right. Yeah, but I think this is a different direction though. But what I think is interesting to explore here, at least from my understanding, is this connection between parity operator and the temporally leave algebra, because they're just coming in the same equation, and I think that's something maybe many mathematicians will be interested in who have explored temporally leave algebras. And then one would like, because it brings it closer to quantum computations. There is a direct relationship between, rather they appear in same equation between projection operator, parity operator and the temporally leave operator. So
you're right. We've had that around for a long time and haven't really thought about it carefully enough.
Yeah. Yes. But it will be, I think it will take us more towards measurement based topological quantum computation, because that's where the parity, we can take this parity operator, kind of write down the projection operators or two parities, and then try to see how is it related to temporally leave. Yes. So any other questions or comments?
Ronald, please thank Roshan again for beautiful talk. So please, can you send your slides to Nikolai? So we post it on the conference homepage.
Yeah, sure. I will definitely do that. And thank you very much. I think it was a very, very interesting kind of interaction with all of you. And I hope we continue it in future.
Thank you. It was a pleasure meeting you this way.
Yes. I really liked it. Yes, I think I crossed my I crossed my time also. This is 2. It started at 12:30. So, but yeah,
Sure.
I like it. I like it talking to you.
Well, it's
So
only 3:30, and it's only 3:30 in the morning where I am.
Wow.
Oh.
You already wake up, or you go to bed? The bed.
I'll sleep late.
You want to sleep now, or you already wake up?
You want to meet for a few minutes afterwards. We could leave the Zoom on, or you can call me again. Which do you prefer?
I will send you another. I will send you another. Reference.
Okay. Yeah, but what I'm doing now is I'm talking to Russians and Americans together. Brother American. This is nice. Thank you very much.
Okay,
Thanks for the invitation. Thank you very much.
See you.
Bye-bye, and see you sometime soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.